The humidity at the Chang International Circuit in Thailand doesn't just sit on the skin, it weighs on the soul. Inside the Prima Pramac Yamaha garage, the air was thick with something far more oppressive than the tropical heat. It was the scent of confusion. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, the man hailed as the Stopai King, the rider who had defied physics in World Superbikes to earn his place in the elite MotoGP paddock, was staring at a monitor with a look of pure disbelief. On the screen, the lines of telemetry should have told a story of dominance. Toprak was outbraking the entire field. He was carrying corner speed that defied the laws of friction. But the stopwatch, the only judge that matters in this sport, was delivering a brutal verdict. He was losing. No one inside the paddock expected what would unfold next. It was a mystery that started as a whisper in the first practice session and evolved into a technical nightmare that threatened to derail a multi-million-dollar season. The fans in the grandstands saw a rider struggling to adapt. The commentators speculated about tire degradation and the steep learning curve of the Yamaha M1. But behind the closed doors of the Yamaha hospitality suite, a darker reality was surfacing. The data said the bike was fine, but Toprak's right wrist was telling him a different story. He was fighting a ghost, a mechanical phantom that was stripping him of his greatest weapon. And as the sun began to set over Bararam, the team realized that the disaster in Thailand wasn't a failure of the rider. It was a betrayal by the machine. Yet the true extent of this mechanical treason would stay hidden until the final checkered flag fell, leaving the entire paddock stunned by what was actually happening inside that Yamaha engine. To understand the tension in Thailand, one must understand the stakes of the 2026 season. Yamaha had spent years in the wilderness, watching the European manufacturers like Ducati and KTM turn the MotoGP grid into a personal playground. When they finally secured the signature of Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, it wasn't just a rider signing, it was a statement of war. Toprak brought with him a level of aggression that the Japanese factory had lacked for a decade. He was the chosen one, the man tasked with bringing the M1 back to the front of the pack against the likes of Marquez and Jorge Martin. But with that hope came an immense, crushing weight of expectation. Inside the garage, the pressure was building fast. Moving from a production-based superbike to a prototype MotoGP machine is like moving from a fighter jet to a spacecraft. Everything is more violent, more precise, and infinitely more fragile. Throughout the early stages of the weekend, the narrative was simple. Toprak is still learning. The media pointed to his inconsistent pace as a symptom of a rider finding his limits. But Toprak isn't a rider who searches for limits, he creates them. As he sat in the corner of the garage, shielded by his inner circle, the whispers began to spread among the mechanics. He wasn't missing his marks. He wasn't failing to adapt. He was being handicapped. The rider who had built a career on finding a way had finally encountered a wall he couldn't climb. And from that moment, nothing would ever be the same for the Prima Pramac project. The first free practice session at the Chang International Circuit is usually a time for shaking down the bike, finding a base map, and scrubbing in tires. But for Toprak, the first few laps felt like a descent into madness. Every time he picked the bike up from a long, sweeping corner and pinned the throttle, there was a hesitation, a microscopic lag that shouldn't exist in a world-class prototype. It was as if the bike was gasping for air. According to internal reports, Yamaha MotoGP team engineers began noticing strange signs as early as that first hour. Telemetry data showed unusual power fluctuations. One lap, the bike delivered its full 270-plus horsepower. The next, it stuttered. Initially, the team tried to address the issue with the simplest of means. They are engineers, they trust the software. They changed electronic parameters, altered the engine mapping, and adjusted the traction control settings. They assumed the tie heat was causing the electronics to protect the engine by cutting power. But as the session ended and Toprak climbed off the bike, his face was a mask of frustration. He told his crew chief that the acceleration was hollow. It was a description that left the technicians scratching their heads. The sensors said the throttle bodies were open. The fuel flow was correct, yet the rider was insisting the bike was a second slow on the straights. The team was facing a rift. Do they trust the million-dollar sensors or the instinct of the man in the saddle? It was a gamble that would cost them dearly, but the real turning point happened away from the cameras, in a private meeting where the first seeds of doubt were sown. The 2026 season marked a massive technical pivot for Yamaha, as they transitioned toward the V4 engine architecture to keep pace with Ducati's straight-line supremacy. But with new technology comes new vulnerabilities. In MotoGP, a few percent drop in power isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's the difference between a podium and a mid-pack finish. In the high-speed sections of the Bararam track, the Yamaha was being hunted. Toprak, known for his late-braking heroics, was doing the impossible. He was gaining 0.3 of a second on the entry to Turn 1 and Turn 3. He was risking everything, sliding the rear tire and pushing the front to the point of collapse just to stay in the hunt. But as soon as the bike straightened up, the Ducatis of Jorge Martin and Marquez would simply breeze past. It was a psychological torture. To work so hard in the corners only to be defenseless on the straights is enough to break any rider's spirit. Inside the garage, the tension was reaching a breaking point. The engineers were obsessed with the mapping, convinced it was a software glitch. They were looking at the brain of the bike while the heart was slowly failing. Some mechanics claimed something felt off with the engine note, a subtle change in the frequency of the exhaust, but in the high-decibel chaos of a MotoGP paddock, these nuances are often lost. Toprak was trapped in a V4 paradox. He had the most advanced engine Yamaha had ever built, but it was performing like a relic. And what the paddock discovered next would leave even his closest team members stunned. When the lights went out for the Thailand Grand Prix, the world expected a masterclass in defensive riding. What they got was a desperate struggle for survival. Toprak launched well, but within 2 laps the Phantom returned with a vengeance. On the long 1.2-kilometer straight, the gap between his Yamaha and the leading group didn't just grow, it exploded. He was a sitting duck. Riders like Pedro Acosta on the KTM were pulling several meters on him before they even reached 6th gear. To the naked eye, it looked like Toprak was struggling with his tires. In reality, he was fighting a machine that was losing its lifeblood. The duels were suicidal. Every time Marquez or Acosta passed him on the straight, Toprak would dive-bomb them on the brakes into the next hairpin. It was a spectacular, high-stakes game of chicken, but you can only defy the laws of physics for so long. The physical toll was immense. Because he had no free time on the straights to rest, Toprak was wrestling the bike for every millisecond. Rumors suggested deeper tension behind closed doors as the race progressed, with team management realizing that Toprak was overcompensating for a bike that was fundamentally broken. He was riding at 110%, while the engine was giving him 95%. It was a recipe for a high-speed disaster. Yet despite the invisible anchor dragging behind him, he refused to pull into the pits. He stayed out, dragging that wounded Yamaha toward the finish line, fueled by a mixture of rage and professional pride. But the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. The checkered flag was merely the beginning of the real drama. As the bikes were wheeled into Parc Fermé, the Yamaha engineers didn't celebrate Toprak's stable finish. They moved with a sense of urgency that bordered on panic. The bike was immediately taken back to the garage and shielded from view. The standard post-race debrief lasted 4 hours. When the engine was finally dismantled and the telemetry was cross-referenced with physical inspections, the truth finally surfaced. It wasn't the software. It wasn't the mapping, it was micro-damage. A single internal component, suspected to be a valve seal or a piston ring, had suffered a hairline fracture during the very first practice session. This tiny, almost invisible flaw was causing a minute loss of pressure in the combustion system. It wasn't enough to make the engine explode or smoke, which is why it was so hard to detect. But it was enough to bleed the engine's efficiency dry. For a rider like Toprak, who relies on punchy corner exits, this loss of pressure meant he was losing his thrust at the exact moment he needed it most. This wasn't a set-up error, it was a manufacturing ghost that had haunted him for 3 days. The realization hit the team like a physical blow. They had spent the entire weekend questioning the electronics and in some cases questioning the rider's feedback when the mechanical heart of the machine was slowly hemorrhaging power. But what happened after that left the Yamaha top brass facing a much larger storm. The Thailand Grand Prix will not be remembered for the points Toprak Razgatlıoğlu scored, but for the questions it left behind. This discovery was crucial for Yamaha, but it was also terrifying. If this micro-damage was a one-off fluke, they could breathe a sigh of relief. But if it was a symptom of a deeper reliability issue with their new V4 design, then the 2026 season was in grave danger. Paddock whispers suggest that the Japanese factory has since launched an emergency audit of their entire engine supply. The political fallout within the garage was immediate. A rift had formed between the electronic engineers who trusted their screens and the mechanical crew who now realized they had ignored the rider's feel. Toprak's performance in Thailand, in hindsight, was nothing short of miraculous. To finish where he did with a compromised engine is a testament to why he is considered a generational talent. He didn't just ride a MotoGP bike, he managed a crisis at 200 miles per hour. But as the freight is packed and the teams move toward the next round, a heavy cloud remains over the blue garage. The competition is getting faster and the Ducatis are showing no signs of weakness. For Toprak, the message is clear. He has the skill to win, but he is at the mercy of a machine that is still finding its soul. Thailand was a warning, a brutal reminder that in the world of MotoGP, the smallest fracture can break the biggest dreams. However, the twist that followed in the next technical briefing would change the championship narrative entirely, as Yamaha prepares for a gamble that could either save their season or end it in a cloud of smoke.